a silent ocean. But this silence was deceptive. During the Ordovician period, life was rapidly expanding, and the fossil record clearly shows that this growth was not random. The Ordovician represents the second great act of the Paleozoic era. Around 485 million years ago, Earth entered a new phase, and during this time, especially within the oceans, profound transformations reshaped the course of life. Fossil evidence reveals that the Ordovician was not merely a span of time, but a critical threshold where evolution accelerated. During the Ordovician, Earth changed not only in terms of life, but also in its planetary structure. Accelerating plate movements expanded the ocean floor and produced some of the highest global sea levels of the Phanerozoic eon. As a result, continents were extensively submerged, and North America was at times almost entirely covered by shallow seas. The Ordovician period marked a pivotal acceleration in the history of life. Scientists refer to this phase as the Ordovician Radiation. Species diversity in the oceans increased rapidly, and this rise was not merely numerical. By the end of the period, nearly all modern body plans of marine invertebrates had already emerged. The same process also accelerated the early rise of fishes. Ordovician seas had become densely populated, with brachiopods, bryozoans, trilobites, mollusks, various arthropods, and graptolites coexisting within the same ecosystems. At the same time, change was not limited to the oceans alone. Fossil evidence indicates that primitive plant-like organisms began colonizing land for the first time, marking the earliest step toward terrestrial life. Along this temporary boundary between sea and land, some arthropods likely made brief excursions onto land. However, permanent terrestrial ecosystems had not yet formed. Despite these developments, the primary stage of the Ordovician remained the depths of the oceans. Sea stars, known as the asteroidea, and their close relatives, the brittle stars, appeared for the first time during this period. With their 5-armed radial body plans, these organisms introduced a new mode of movement across the seafloor. Asteroidea, using powerful arms and a central disk, moved slowly but effectively, exerting predatory pressure on shelled organisms. Brittle stars, or ophiuroidea, followed a different strategy. Their thin, flexible arms allowed them to move more rapidly across the seafloor, gathering organic particles and small organisms as food. Though sharing a common ancestry, these two groups diverged into distinct ecological roles during the Ordovician, making the seafloor not only more crowded, but functionally more diverse. Sea lilies, known as crinoids, also appeared for the first time during the Ordovician. Anchored to the seafloor with stalked bodies and upward-reaching arms, they fed by filtering water currents. Rather than active predation, crinoids depended on ocean flow for survival. This adaptation allowed food resources to be utilized not only on the seafloor itself, but also within the water layers above it. The seafloor was no longer just a surface to live upon. It became a complex habitat with life occupying multiple vertical levels. One of the most striking examples of this organization was the Edrioasteroids, a group of round-bodied and immobile echinoderms that lived in Ordovician seas. Firmly attached to hard surfaces, they remained fixed in place. Their 5-rayed feeding grooves, radiating from the center of the body, resembled sea stars at first glance. However, these structures were not used for movement, but for collecting food carried by ocean currents. In Ordovician seas, attaching to the seafloor was not the only way to access food. Graptolites were unusual colonial animals whose fossils often resembled plant-like forms. Their thin, branching or ribbon-shaped structures led to their long misidentification as plants. In reality, graptolites were animals belonging to the Hemichordata group. These colonies were not attached to the seafloor. Instead, they lived suspended in the water column, drifting with ocean currents. They did not need to move in search of food, as microscopic organisms and organic particles carried by the water served as their primary nourishment. Most graptolite colonies measured only a few centimeters in length, though some species exceeded 10 centimeters. Their colonial structure was not accidental. It allowed them to remain buoyant in the water, feed more efficiently, and spread rapidly across vast marine regions. Life in Ordovician seas was no longer limited to invertebrates. During this period, the earliest representatives of vertebrate evolution began to appear. Known as ostracoderms, these primitive fishes lacked jaws and paired fins. Their bodies were covered with heavy bony plates or thick scales, forming a rigid armor. While this protected them from predators, it also limited their mobility. Ostracoderms were among the first fishes to use their gills solely for respiration. They obtained food by filtering small particles from the water through pharyngeal gill structures. Through these traits, they laid the foundation for the later emergence of jawed fishes and vertebrates. Evolution in the Ordovician did not proceed in a single direction. Corals first appeared in the fossil record during the early stages of the Ordovician. The earliest forms were tabulate colonial corals. Composed of numerous small polyps rather than individual organisms, these colonies gradually formed large and rigid structures. Permanently anchored to the seafloor, corals transformed their surroundings into long-lasting habitats. These structures provided shelter and feeding grounds not only for corals themselves, but for many other marine organisms. As a result, the foundations of permanent and complex reef-like ecosystems were established in Ordovician seas. Brachiopods were among the most widespread and successful sessile invertebrates of the Ordovician. Possessing two shelled bodies, they attach themselves to the seafloor or to the hard surfaces created by coral reefs. These reefs offered brachiopods both a stable foundation and access to flowing water. By slightly opening their shells, brachiopods extended feeding structures known as lopophores, filtering microscopic organisms from the water. This feeding strategy, combined with coral structures, created productive microenvironments where water circulated continuously. As a result, Ordovician reefs consisted not only of corals, but of complex communities where many sessile organisms lived together. Within these complex communities, a new mode of life began to gain strength: organisms that moved freely across the seafloor. Gastropods had been small and relatively rare during the Cambrian period. By the Ordovician, they diversified significantly, with some species reaching larger body sizes. Their coiled shells protected them from physical damage while allowing a more active lifestyle on the seafloor. Most gastropods moved slowly across the seabed, feeding on algae, organic debris, and small organisms. This mobile feeding strategy introduced new pathways of energy flow within environments shaped by sessile organisms such as corals and brachiopods. As a result, Ordovician seas became increasingly dynamic ecosystems. This growing mobility made the emergence of a new ecological role inevitable. Cephalopods, like their gastropod relatives, diversified notably during the Ordovician. What distinguished them, however, was their method of feeding. Early cephalopods with straight or gently curved shells were capable of active movement and could pursue prey. Some orthoconic nautiloids exceeded 3 meters in length, becoming the largest predators of their time. Their size fundamentally altered the balance between predation and defense in Ordovician seas. These massive predators exerted constant pressure on trilobites, gastropods, and smaller invertebrates. As a result, defense became central to survival. Modern relatives of today's squids, Cephalopods were among the most effective predators in the Ordovician seas. During this period, some groups of starfish were also active hunters. In contrast, the majority of marine life was still composed of organisms that fed on detritus, filtered particles from the water, or grazed on algae. The Ordovician period began as an age of extraordinary biological diversity. The seas were more crowded and complex than ever before. Yet this richness proved vulnerable to rapidly changing planetary conditions. Around 444 million years ago, sudden climatic shifts devastated much of Ordovician marine life. This event marked one of the first major mass extinctions in Earth's history. And life, once again, was forced to begin anew.